Hi folks, and welcome back to News Roundup, episode 5. This is Jessica.
And I'm Ellie. Welcome back, guys.
So today we've got another few cases to dip into for you, as well as an update on the Bryan Kohberger case in Idaho. But did you want to get us started, Ellie?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick this off. We are going to be talking about Jill Dando today. Jill Dando was a pretty famous news anchor in the UK, and she was shot dead on her own doorstep on Gowan Avenue, Fulham, London, execution style, on the 27th of April 1999. She was just 37 years old. Her killer pressed the muzzle of the pistol right against Jill's head so that her head would absorb most of the sound and act as a natural silencer, and used special ammunition to destroy her brainstem. Jill Dando stood no chance. Jill was said to be close with her family, had lots of friends, and she was engaged at the time of her death and reported to be very happy. Jill Dando also broke into TV news in a big way, and she was definitely one of the most trusted news anchors of the time. Her death has gone unsolved for 26 years now. But that's not to say that nobody was arrested for her murder. About a year after Jill's death, they began to focus on a local man called Barry George. He was arrested and convicted on circumstantial evidence of a single particle of firearm residue that matched the ammunition used in Jill's murder. However, the forensic evidence was then discounted, and on retrial, George was acquitted of Jill's murder. And since then, no one else has been in the frame for her death. In fact, police closed her investigation. It's also worth noting that 8 of the eyewitnesses on Gowan Avenue, none of them identified George as the man they saw leaving the scene of the crime. Now, while eyewitnesses can be problematic, I do find it odd that none of them identified George as the man that they all saw. Now, I know how Jess has thoughts about this.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's worth mentioning that Barry George was seen opposite Jill Dando's house around an hour before she was murdered, and he didn't really have any reason to be hanging around on Gowan Avenue. But yeah, it is concerning that none of the people who saw this running man have identified him as Barry George. I think it's possible that is someone who's not connected at all. But it's the 26th anniversary of Jill's murder, and we often see these kind of stories pop up. And I think you saw one of these, didn't you?
I did. The Mirror enters the story, and they are a British tabloid newspaper. They are claiming that Jill Dando was assassinated by a Serbian hitman, Milorad Ulamek. Ulamek is currently serving 40 years in prison as a twice-convicted killer. Not a nice man at all. You see, there is a man known to police as N6814. He was caught on CCTV at Putney Bridge tube station about 23 minutes after Jill was shot. For reference, that's about a mile away from Gowan Avenue. And facial recognition experts, including Emmy Polito, claim that he bears more than a striking resemblance to Ulamek. In fact, Polito claims he can find no differences between the images of Ulamek and N6814. Not only is Polito certain that Ulamek is N6814, but so is an eyewitness who was driving down the Fulham Palace Road in London, which was at the end of Gowan Avenue. It was like Gowan Avenue is a residential street and Fulham Palace Road is the main road.
I mean, we looked at the photos, didn't you? And
yeah.
I thought they looked quite similar.
Yeah, to be fair, they do look quite similar. Now, It could be a complete coincidence that Ulamek was in London at the time. It was a time of unrest in Serbia. RAF planes were bombing it, and Jill Dando's friend and colleague was reporting from the ground in Serbia at the time, and Jill was covering the story a lot on the news with coverage from Simpson sort of worked in. But the situation in Serbia was being reported worldwide, so why kill Jill Dando? That's the question. I mean, killing her would have no effect on the RAF bombing in Serbia.
Yeah, I think if that man is Ulamek, I think it's. I mean, it could be a coincidence. I think it's unlikely. As I've said, I think what's possible is that it's not him and it's someone related.
Yeah, so it is odd, for sure. So let's just go through what happened. Jill's next-door neighbour heard her lock her BMW, and then 30 seconds later he heard a female scream, then witnessed a man, thick-set and in his 30s, calmly walking away from the scene of the crime towards the Fulham Palace Road. A second witness saw the same man, described him at the same time, but said he saw him running very quickly away from the scene in the same direction as witness number 1. The second witness also said that at one point the suspect looked over his shoulder and slowed down as if to look more natural when he saw people gathering around Jill. Once the suspect hit the Fulham Palace Road, he was apparently almost hit by 2 vehicles, one being the witness I mentioned above, who was certain that she saw N6814 Ulamek, and a second who told the Mirror that he's about 80% sure that the man that he almost ran down was Ulamek too.
Yeah, that's quite a few people. Although these people identifying Ulamek are doing so 26 years after the fact. Or, well, I think some of them might have done it last year possibly, but quite a long time afterwards.
Yeah. Yes. But Barry George, I can't quite let him go. He has obsessions with female presenters, and at that time, Jill Dando was one of, if not the biggest female presenter on British TV. George was once married, during which he physically abused his wife. He's also attacked a woman on her own doorstep before, and that is more than a little odd. During his trials for Jill Dando's murder, he was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, which we would now obviously just claim as ASD, but I wanted to report it exactly as it was presented in court back in 1999, as well as several personality disorders, narcissistic, histrionic, antisocial, and possibly paranoid, as well as somatization and factitious disorders, and ADHD. So ultimately, he's not a well man. A search of his home revealed over 4,000 photographs that he'd covertly taken of women.
Yeah, obsessed with guns as well. And there's a photo that goes round of him wearing a mask and holding a gun. And obviously, in the UK, you can get a license to have a gun, although not usually the type that he was holding, which appears to be some kind of modified handgun. But Barry George was holding guns illegally, and it's very unusual to legally possess a gun in the middle of London. So this is not the same as having a gun in the US.
No, I would say that most gun ownerships in the UK are shotguns for shooting, like in the country. Farmers.
Shooters and farmers.
But it does seem to us that Barry George would more likely be involved than a Serbian hitman. But to be clear, he was acquitted, and that is totally alleged based on comparing the two situations.
Yeah, I can't let Barry George go either. I do think the case was thin. What I would say, and I definitely would have more time for Barry George being involved in the Serbian theory. What I would say is that where you see these things come up over and over again while the case is unsolved. I mean, there's been connections with Libya for years, and I'm very skeptical of these grand conspiracy theories about Jill Dando's murder.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I just think that if she was assassinated, I think that whoever sanctioned it would have claimed it by now.
Yeah, I think that's very likely.
But yeah, that is what's going on. That is the latest in the Jill Dando case. Jess, you've got a case for us. The Otley Run attempted massacre.
Yeah, that's right. So on April the 26th, there was an attempted massacre, and ultimately a terrorist attack in Leeds in the UK. The perpetrator was Owen Oz Lawrence. He went to Otley Road in Headingley, Leeds, with a number of weapons, including a crossbow and a shotgun, and he opened fire. 2 women were injured, and Lawrence then shot himself. He died on April 29th in hospital. And the reason this has been called the Otley Run attempted massacre is because the Otley Road hosts a well-known pub crawl called the Otley Run. So pub crawl, bar crawl, there's around 16 pubs that go down the road. And even from that, we can see that the intended victims would likely have been drinking, out having fun, and Lawrence has gone there to try and kill as many people as possible.
It's interesting to me that he gave up after shooting 2 women and then shot himself.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happened there. Perhaps that something will come out explaining that. Presumably, well, there'll be an inquest for him, then maybe an inquiry. There's a lot of things that have come out since his death that make me think this might warrant an inquiry rather than just an inquest.
Okay.
So I'm going to run through kind of a timeline, I suppose, of concerning online posts made by Owen Lawrence. So some of these I found myself, and some of these were reported in the media, and I have verified them all as being from Owen Lawrence. And we're going to start last year, March the 5th, 2024. Owen Lawrence posted, quote, "Here is a thought experiment. If you knew your days were numbered, that in actual fact you were going to die very soon, like let's say a few days, then suddenly you became aware that anything you did now would have 0 consequences for you, what would you do? I mean, you could do anything, and I mean anything you wished. It would not matter to you at all. It would not backlash on you at all. No fear of going to prison or people seeking vengeance against you. What would you do?" End quote. Now, in isolation, that represents, I suppose, a concerning thought pattern. But if it's just a thought pattern that someone's expressed unwisely on its own, that's all it is. But it clearly concerned one of Owen's friends. We're just going to call him Johnny. And he commented, "Oz, take this down, my boy. You're better than this." And so I think the reason I've included that, because the upcoming posts are more concerning, is that over a year before Owen Lawrence launched his attempted massacre, someone has flagged concerns directly with him about something that he's posted. So then we go forward to January 11th this year. Lawrence posted, quote, "What I hate, what I don't like." I'm not going to read the whole list of this because there's quite a lot here, but I'm going to read some of the things that stood out to me. So what I hate, what I don't like: gender equality, bisexual relationships, homosexual rapists, knobheads, Islamic extremists, feminists of all 4 waves, feminoids, virtue signalling, fat people, normies, female empowerment, the great replacement, and society. End quote.
Well, that's disturbing.
It's very disturbing, isn't it? I mean, the fact that knobheads are in there is interesting. I mean, generally, I think people can agree they don't like knobheads. But the other things that are mentioned, I mean, bisexual relationships, homosexual rapists, the fact that he says it like that, I mean, no one likes rapists, but he's very clearly,
It's just homosexual rapists he's got a
Yeah.
problem with. If you're a straight rapist, go for it, my son, is what he's saying.
that's what it sounds like, yeah. Feminists, feminoids, so both obviously disparaging to women, dislikes female empowerment and gender equality. And when he says he hates society, that's the sort of thing that an edgy teenager might post. But it's a bit more concerning from a man who's older and considering what he did. And just the last thing I want to highlight, the mention of the Great Replacement. So the Great Replacement is a white nationalist conspiracy theory. The idea that that white people in the West are being replaced with people of colour, with immigrants. It's nonsense, but it seems clear that Owen Lawrence believed in this conspiracy theory.
I'd just like to point out that I don't believe that straight rapists should go for it, my son.
Yeah, good clarification. Rape is bad. Right, so on an undated post from Mr. Lawrence, which is presumably from around the same time as his dislike or hate list, just because that's the kind of the context we're looking at, he's posted, "What do I love? What do I like?" And again, I'm going to read some of these, but not all. What do I love? Political power, existentialism, reactionaries, flirting with far-right ideas while not being far-right. The philosophy of Fight Club. The philosophy of Fight Club. Military history, school shooters, and then he lists a number of mass shooters. So Anders Breivik, Eric Harrison, Dylan Klebold, Pekka, Eric Ovenen, Randy Stair, Vladislav Roslyakov, and Ethan Blair Miller. He's also mentioned patriarchy. And I mean, again, there's a number of things there that are really concerning. Like, obviously, mention of patriarchy, it's very clear what he thinks about women. The mention of reactionaries and far-right ideas. And also the philosophy of Fight Club. And the reason I laugh is the people who talk about the philosophy of Fight Club in this context are people who do not understand the book or the film. It's a gay man's satire of masculinity. It's not what you think it is. But the most concerning part of this is, of course, the mention of school shootings and the listing of mass shooters as people that he idolizes. I mean, there's the mention of the Columbine shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and clearly Lawrence was trying to emulate them.
I do find it interesting that then tucked away in there is journaling, meditation, and self-improvement. It is a very random 3 things to throw in there alongside your far right, full of killers, things that I like.
I noticed that he likes new metal as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we're about 20 years too late to like new metal, aren't we? Right. On April 14th, Lawrence posted, "This is really strange, and if anyone can clarify for me where he might have got this idea from, please do." But he posted a picture of a lollipop stick, like the wooden stick that goes in the middle of an ice lolly, and he's carved it to a sharp point and captioned it, "I made a second homemade lollipop shank, which is better." So obviously I know shank is a knife, I can see that's what he's tried to make, but it doesn't look very effective, and he clearly had access to other weapons, so I'm not sure what this is about. But if anyone knows where he got that idea from, yeah, let us know. And finally, before his attempted massacre, the day of the attempted massacre, so this is last Saturday, he posted this. And this I am going to read in full, I think, because it's important. Attack information. Event, the Otley Run Massacre. Targets, students, nightclub goers, pub crawlers, Otley Run participants, society, humanity, human race, neurotypicals, and police if I need to. Gate, and he's left that blank, so I assume this is written in advance. He's pasted it in on the day he decided to do it and forgot to write the date in. Attack type, spree killing, mass murder, terrorism, revenge, misogynistic rage, homicide, suicide. Location, Otley Road, Leeds, England, Headingley, LS6. Perpetrator's name, Owen Oz Lawrence. Ethnicity/nationality, white British. Religious views, agnostic. Political views, reactionary, with some small L libertarian sympathies. I have also explored far-right ideas by reading through Brenton Tarrant's 74-page manifesto titled The Great Replacement. Weapons: crossbow, break-barrel air gun, Sig Sauer Rattler CO2 gun, power line. He's written it Dai, but I think it must be Daisy, so I'm going to read it as Daisy. Powerline Daisy 415 steel BB gun, combat gloves, Brooklyn Basher brackets unbreakable baseball bat, blank fire gun with modified ammo, and the 2 homemade lollipop shanks. Wow. That feels really weird to read, even to read it, because we came really close to a massacre, I think.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah. So what I think we've outlined there is a very clear escalation from March last year to last Saturday. And you'll notice that he himself called it the Otley Run Massacre and said he was targeting the Otley Run participants. Now, he's also listed at the end there a number of weapons, including the lollipop shanks that he posted about. But in the clip that I saw of him walking down the road kind of seconds before he starts shooting, it looks like he's only carrying 2 weapons, one of which is the crossbow, one of which is, I'm not a gun expert, it was a longer gun. And those are the only 2 weapons that police have listed as recovering. So I don't know how many of those weapons he was carrying. He may have been wearing gloves, I think. I think he was wearing gloves.
I think maybe he realised that it was too many to carry and that he'd not be able to actually do anything for arsing around with which weapon he was going to use, essentially.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I was like, that's too many weapons. You don't need that many weapons. So again, in that last post, there's another mention of exploring far-right ideas and being motivated by, quote, misogynistic rage. So he mentions again there far-right ideas, and as he previously said, he hates feminism and gender equality, so it's unsurprising that he's motivated by misogynistic rage. I'd also put a further link to the far right. There's pictures of him that have been released wearing Crusaders crosses and also a Deus Vult t-shirt. Now, Deus Vult is kind of originally a prayer. It means God wills in Latin. It's not inherently a bad thing, but the Deus Vult slogan has been embraced by the far right because it was used in the Crusades. And when it's combined with the Crusaders cross, it's very clear that this person's affiliation is not to the church, it's to the far right. You'll remember in the first post that I quoted from, a friend of Owen's called Johnny had commented on there saying that he should take it down. And it seems that Johnny saw the warning signs. And according to a post on Johnny's own Facebook page, he did. Sorry, he wrote just after the attack on the 27th. WTF. So chances are most of you have heard about the awful incident that happened in Headingley yesterday. I know Owen, and I pointed this out to his mum and his sister at least 1 to 2 years ago, that he was very unstable and a ticking time bomb just ready to go off. What did they do? Nothing. I can't speak for Owen, and I have no idea what was going on in his head. His mum is very wicked and awful to Owen. He's treated like a child. Hopefully, he'll get the help that he needs. And then Johnny names his mother and sister, which we're not going to do, and writes, told you. So clearly kind of upset and angry. And, as you can tell, he wrote that before Lawrence died. We have reached out to Johnny for an interview. We're still trying to coordinate that, but he did give us a quote, which was, "We were friends. He was a very lonely person who didn't talk much, but he was obsessed with mass killing. He had no childhood or adult life." How sad is that?
It's very sad. It sounds like a case of, like when I look at serial killers, I often separate the child from the adult and what they did as an adult.
Yeah.
Because as an adult, I believe you know better. But as a child, you know nothing else. And I feel for him as a child who had no life, no childhood.
Yeah.
That is very, very sad.
So we've openly said and called this a terrorist attack. That seems to be the line the police are taking. There's counter-terror police looking at it. Lawrence mentioned in his own post that this was a terrorist attack. But it's not just reminiscent to me of other mass shootings. It reminded me of the Hunt murders by Kyle Clifford. So Kyle Clifford, motivated by his own misogynistic rage after watching Andrew Tate videos, he murdered his ex-girlfriend Louise Hunt, her sister Hannah, and their mother Carol, before attempting to kill himself. Unlike Owen Lawrence, he didn't succeed. He put himself in a wheelchair for the rest of his life, and that life is going to be served as a whole lifetime in prison. Yeah, it reminded me, in terms of the rage towards women, it reminded me of Kyle Clifford, and also the Plymouth shootings a few years ago. I think that was 2017.
And also the choice of weapon, the crossbow.
Yes.
You have to wonder, although Kyle Clifford isn't mentioned directly, if he was a bit of an inspiration to him.
Yeah. Yeah, the use of the crossbow. And when I posted this, one of my American friends commented, crossbow, very kind of taken aback by the use of a crossbow. And I wouldn't say that it's got to the point of being common here, but most UK residents don't have guns, wouldn't have access to it, definitely wouldn't have a license. So a crossbow that can be legally held can be kind of a convenient weapon of choice, I think, for people. What I would say is that when Kyle Clifford shot the Hunts, there was an outcry in the media calling for a ban on crossbows.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the solution. I think the problem is men, and it is invariably men, who are angry with the world, but invariably with women as well, taking out their anger using whatever weapons they have available. I think we need to have a bigger conversation than just crossbows are bad.
I agree. There's clearly right now a great divide between men and women.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to talk about. That's the problem.
It's that anger, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the Otley Run attempted massacre. We are hoping to have an interview with Johnny, and if we can arrange that, we will bring that to you as soon as possible. But Ellie, the next case we've got to talk about is a mass shooting, and I may say this wrong, but in Uppsala, Sweden.
That's correct. That is the subject, and as far as I'm concerned, you did a pretty good job of saying Uppsala.
Perfect.
So, yeah, a little bit about Uppsala before we get into the shooting itself. It is the 4th largest city in Sweden and an old university town. It's very much like Oxford or Cambridge in the UK. And every year on April 30th, Uppsala celebrates Valborg night in a big way. And our lovely Swedish correspondent Lasa tells us that Uppsala holds the biggest Valborg night celebration in the country. So this shooting has kind of coincided with Valborg, which is a celebration of spring emerging out of winter. It's a tradition that goes back to when the Norse gods were celebrated and prayed to. But on Tuesday of this week, a mass shooting broke out at a hair barber in Uppsala, with the suspect fleeing the scene on an electric scooter, leaving 3 dead and several injured. The 3 dead were all between the ages of 15 to 20 years old. 2 of the 3 were shot while sitting in the barbershop seats getting their hair cut. And the 3rd person to die is rumoured to have been approached outside the barbershop, and he ran inside and was killed.
Wow.
As of today, on April 30th, there appears to have been just the one killer who is in police custody. The killer is said to be just 16 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And police arrested him at his own home while washing his clothes in chlorine. Before the shooting, the killer had absconded from an HVB home, which is a bit like juvenile detention. But Swedish people question what good the HVB homes do, as they kind of view them to just be more like a boarding school for criminality, where they're just learning more and more criminal skills rather than being rehabilitated.
Yeah, that can be a real problem with, I think, any form of incarceration, really.
Yeah,
If you just get put with more experienced criminals.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, all of those involved in the shooting also have immigrant status in Sweden. And this will have massive effects on the immigration debates that are happening not just in Sweden, but all over the world currently.
Is that all of the victims and the shooter?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not a good situation at all. And I know that tonight, whilst celebrating Valborg, there will be more security on hand than there was in case this wasn't just a one-off by
16.
16-year-old. Yeah, I know he's in custody, but in case there was a plan with somebody else, or
Or a copycat.
yeah, or a copycat, or any of these things, I'm sure there will be more security to enable people to celebrate safely.
Yeah. Thank you, Lassa, for passing that on to us. That's been really interesting to read about.
Yeah, it has. And thank you for your offer of translating anything we need in the future as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that was a short and sweet one. And that leaves us with Bryan Kohberger, the update.
Yeah, so we have looked at a number of rulings in the Idaho 4 murders case. That's the case against Bryan Kohberger, who is accused of murdering Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin on November 13th, 2022. They were all University of Idaho students, and they were at an off-campus house on King Road. So there's a couple of orders on motions that I don't think we've discussed previously, and these orders have kind of come out over the last 10 days. But on those ones, briefly, Judge Hippler has ruled that texts between the surviving roommates and the 911 call are allowed into evidence in the trial, other than a few statements and texts which have been redacted because they're hearsay. Another ruling, Dylan Mortensen, one of the surviving roommates, is allowed to testify that the man she saw, the killer, had, quote, bushy eyebrows. And if you've seen Bryan Kohberger, you'll know why that matters. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that a motion from the defence to stop Dylan being able to say the killer had bushy eyebrows is a concession by them that Bryan Kohberger does have bushy eyebrows. Judge Hippler said that Dylan's description is highly relevant and remarkably consistent. The judge has also ruled that Bryan Kohberger has not established a discovery violation, and there's no reason to sanction the prosecution. And there's this very memorable line in that ruling: the defendant asked for everything, and everything is what he received. Defendant cannot demand everything under the sun and then complain about the weight of all the planets.
I like that quote.
Yeah, and that's in response to Kohberger saying they've sent him too much. Well, they've sent him their discovery. That's what he asked for. The judge has also ruled, and this is stuff that we've kind of got into before, that Kohberger's mannerisms, which the defence says are due to his ASD, autism spectrum disorder, would only be relevant if he testifies. And I think you mentioned that when we talked about this a few weeks ago, Ellie.
Yeah, I think we did. And it remains to be true.
Yeah. The judge mentions that a defence expert report, says Kohberger made awkward comments during his assessment. And one of the awkward comments that the judge uses as an example was that Kohberger, quote, had a lot of fun completing a cognitive test. Which I don't think that's an awkward comment at all. That's what I'd say. I love tests. Like, Do you think that's a particularly awkward comment?
Not really. I think that's a fairly harmless comment. I wouldn't say it. I don't particularly like tests, but I don't think it's an awkward thing to say. It's a
No.
cognitive test. It's not like he had a lot of fun being tested for murderous rage, or do you
Yeah,
know what I
that's true.
mean?
Yeah, yeah. I I think that's possibly the judge has chosen that example because it's such a weak example.
It's an odd thing to say.
Yeah. So this one we definitely got into. Judge Hitler has ruled that Kohberger's DCD, developmental coordination diagnosis, can't be discussed at trial. So if you recall, the defense argument was that Kohberger wouldn't have had time to kill the victims because of his developmental coordination disorder. And I was very disparaging about that in particular because I have DCD or dyspraxia, and it's just not a believable argument. It doesn't impact your coordination to the point where you wouldn't be able to attack four drunk students. It's not like Kohberger is paralyzed, for example. So I think it's a very weak argument. And I think we also said that it wasn't clear from the defense motion whether or not Kohberger actually had developmental coordination disorder, or if it had been alluded to that he might have the traits of it. Well, lo and behold, the judge has said it is not a diagnosis from which the defendant currently suffers. So there you go. Judge Hitler also said there is nothing in the disclosure or report from the expert suggesting the defendant was physically unable to commit the crimes due to impairments associated with DCD. During the hearing, this was very good from the judge. One of the attorneys was reading from a report that described Kohberger as having difficulty tying his shoes. And the judge said, "This is before he starts his PhD program, right?"
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Those are a number of rulings, and they've all really gone the way of the prosecution. The one that's hit the headlines, really, though, is the defense motion to take the death penalty off the table because of his ASD. And we explained why we thought that would be turned down. The Supreme Court precedent is a case called Atkins v. Virginia, which says it's unconstitutional to execute people with an intellectual disability that doesn't include autism, and that's been clarified by case law since then as well. While we do talk about diagnoses and autism comes back up, I think it's interesting to note that Kohberger, despite all the talk about autism, has only recently been diagnosed, and he's been diagnosed by a defense expert.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a quote from the ruling. At an early age, defendant's school psychologist recommended that he be evaluated for ADHD and Asperger's disorder, now ASD. He was clinically diagnosed with ADHD only. So I think it's fair to be a little skeptical about Kohberger's diagnosis. Certainly about how significantly ASD impacts him. Because not because he's been diagnosed as an adult, being diagnosed as now is completely valid, but the fact that it comes from a defense expert and he was previously assessed for ASD and determined to have ADHD only.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting.
So I'll get a bit more into kind of what some of these experts have said. According to one of them, Dr. Ryan, Kohberger is highly intelligent and has a factual understanding of the proceedings against him, the penalty he is possibly facing, pleas and the roles of courtroom personnel, etc. And there was no evidence of formal thought disorder or thought disorganization. And, Kohberger is studying for a criminology PhD. It was always ridiculous to suggest that he's not capable of assisting in his own defence.
Yeah, it was. Very much so. And it was an insult to those of us that are really autistic.
Yeah, definitely. So the judge gets into some of his rationale for the ruling that he's made, and it's similar to some of the things we've said. So he said, first, intellectual impairment, a hallmark of an intellectual disability, is not present in the diagnostic criteria of ASD, and no court has ever found the two to be equivalent. Defendant has not presented any evidence of national consensus as to whether the death penalty is disproportionate punishment for individuals with ASD. And while intellectually disabled and ASD individuals may share some of the same adaptive impairments, the intellectual deficit, an essential feature of an intellectual disability, is not a diagnostic element of ASD. And he mentions some of the case law around this here. Intellectual disability is not necessary to a diagnosis of ASD and therefore cannot be equated to mental disability for the purpose of Atkins. In fact, in United States v. Reef, the Fourth Circuit declined to apply Atkins to a defendant with ASD who had an IQ of 125. With an IQ of 119, defendant likewise fails to qualify. His diagnosis is not accompanied by an intellectual or language impairment. He graduated from his master's program with a 4.0 GPA. At the time of the homicides, he was enrolled in a doctoral program. This really stood out to me. His experts described him as highly intelligent, having strong verbal abilities, abstract reasoning, memory, concept formation, and reading skills. They noted no evidence of a formal thought disorder or thought disorganization. He understands the proceedings against him and the penalty he is possibly facing. He is generally clearly articulated and demonstrated some typical social behaviours, such as fairly consistent though intense eye contact, polite demeanour, and social conventions. So, I mean, frankly, what's all the fuss been about? Kohberger's own experts very clearly said to the court, yeah, he's got ASD, but he's fine. That's how I read this. He's got ASD, but he's fine. He's doing his PhD, and it feels like a lot of fuss to get to what was a fairly obvious decision in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. I know that it's different for every autistic person, but I struggle with eye contact, and I often close my eyes when I'm talking to people because I don't like the fact that they're looking at me, which was a big clue to the psychiatrist who diagnosed me with ADHD say to me, I think you need to have an assessment for autism as well, as I was diagnosed as an adult. It sounds to me like even though if he has ASD, intense eye contact is probably him going, I must remember to make eye contact, and then just being a bit too much with it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a last quote that I'll give. The defendant has not demonstrated, nor has any court held, that persons with ASD have similar cognitive and behavioural deficiencies that result in an equivalent diminishment of culpability, ability to be deterred, and capacity to assist in their defence as individuals with an intellectual disability. So essentially, it's what we've been saying. Autism is very clearly different to an intellectual disability, and regardless of feelings on the death penalty, I think that's kind of separate, really. The law was never on Kohberger's side on any of this.
No, it wasn't. I do think it's interesting that they've gone, oh, quick, get him diagnosed with ASD, and then shout, he's got autism. He's got autism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't execute him. I'm interested to see where the defence go from here, because despite the very vocal pro-Berger crowd on Twitter who think that Kohberger is definitely innocent and blame a combination of the roommates and the drug running gang, let's just say that the case against Kohberger looks very strong.
Yeah, it does.
Like, here, there's the touch DNA at the scene, his car driving there, his phone's turned off, but before it's turned off, you can see it's travelling in that direction. Searches for news about the murders. Did I mention the touch DNA on the knife? That's a big one.
You did. You did.
I did mention it. Okay, well, mention it twice. And also, it's that big a deal, isn't it? It's a knife sheath underneath the body of one of the victims. And also, the Amazon history showing that Kohberger brought the knife sheath, brought a K-bar knife, and after he lost the knife sheath, went on Amazon to buy a replacement.
Yes, I think for me, the touch DNA is such a big deal because they had not come into contact with him at all.
No.
So it's not like it was transferred by
Exactly.
accident because they never saw Kohberger in that evening prior for him to have touched the victim.
And it was found before.
Yeah.
That's how police found Kohberger, through that DNA. So they couldn't have taken it from him and planted it before they met him. So I guess, where do they go from here? I don't know where they can go. Kohberger is still insisting that he's innocent, which is his right. However, the death penalty is on the table. And, I mean, in Idaho, you can be executed by firing squad. So this might be a case where he'd be wise to look at a plea deal, although I don't think he will.
I agree with you that he'd be wise to look at a plea deal. I think that the murder of 4 students is well enough for any jury to vote for the death penalty.
Yeah, I think that's how it's going. But, we'll see, and we'll keep you updated with motions, in this case, in the future. I think it's fairly clear what we made of these ones. But maybe there'll be some that have a bit more merit in the future. We will see.
Yeah, we will indeed. Right, guys, that is all we've got for you this week. Thank you for joining us again. Don't forget to give us a cheeky 5-star review. Leave a comment if you can, or a review on Apple Podcasts. Join the group on Facebook, Version of Events. Find us on any social media at Version of Events, including Substack. And yeah, I think that's everything.
Yeah, if you've got any case recommendations, you can always get in touch with us. versionofevents@gmail.com or www.versionofevents.co.uk. And yeah, 5-star reviews wherever you're listening to your podcast, please, guys. But yeah.
Excellent.
Until next time, guys, thanks for joining us.
See you soon, guys. Bye.
Bye.